Hey, this is John. Thanks for joining me for this Patreon exclusive video today. In this video, I want to accomplish several things with the Jerry. He's ready to be primed, so that's one of the things I want to do. He'll then be ready to be painted, and I want to get the decals on, and I'm hoping to do the panel lining in this video. I'm always hesitant to say what I plan to do at the beginning of a video because my intentions are always, good, but then I get to the end of it and realize, oh, I don't have time to do all of that without, keeping it under 8 hours. But that's my intent at this point, is prime, paint, decal, and panel line. So we'll see if by the end of the video that's what I get to. One last thing I want to do before I prime is I want to get this opening in this cockpit opening masked off. Now, because of the configuration of the model, it's going to be easy enough to just put this in place like that, rather than trying to stuff, some kind of masking in there. A simple way to do this, you could use white glue. I've seen people use little tiny bits of poster putty. I actually like to use Future. That's what I've got decanted in this bottle here, Future floor polish. And I just put on a really heavy bead of it, like this, and this will act as a temporary glue. It'll hold it in there fairly well. I mean, if you knock it really hard, it's going to come off. But I've done this with aircraft for years, temporarily tacking on canopy parts like that. And then all I do is just set that in place and then give it one more coat. And generally, I can't think of a time that I've had problems. When I pull it apart, the only thing I'll have to do is paint the sill of the cockpit itself. And I usually just use, black or something for that. But I'll just go over this. Now, initially when you put this on, it has zero adhesion. I mean, you saw when I touched it with the brush just a second ago, it slid right over. So you have to be able to set this in place and let it sit level and dry. And I'll give it half an hour to dry, and then it should be good to prime. But you just make sure you've got a good amount there to hold it in place. And when I pull it apart later, I've not had any problems with the paint coming up, but just to be sure, I usually take my knife blade and just lightly score along the opening there, just to make sure that I break any seal that it's got, and then I pull it apart, touch it up with a little paint, and it's good to go. All right, with everything primed in some Tamiya rattle can primer, it's time to get to the painting. All right, I've got everything painted up. I went with fairly standard colors for Maschinen Krieger. The lighter color was this RLM 02 gray, and I just based everything in that. I didn't try and do any pre-shading. I just gave everything a solid opaque coat of this RLM 02 gray. And then for the darker color, I did a 50-50 mix of the two, the RLM 02 gray and the RLM 74 gray green. I've used the gray green by itself before, but I thought this time I would try adding in the RLM 02 with it, just so that it would kind of tie the two together a little better. When I've used that RLM 74, it looked okay, but I thought it was a little too different for my eye. I like this more hazy look that comes with mixing the two, and I just freehanded the pattern. In my imagination, this came from the factory with this RLM 02 gray as the base color for the whole thing, and then these camo patterns were field applied. So I tried to make them so they weren't entirely symmetrical, and just sprayed a pattern. The idea being that, if it's seen from the air, it's darker, and then if seen from the side, it breaks up the outline. And then I didn't paint any on the undersides because no one, if this were a real combat vehicle, no one would see that. I also did the legs using the same colors, And I didn't paint any on the sides because as I looked at that, I thought, you know, there's going to be a lot of weathering going on and streaking and staining and rust, and I want that stuff to show up. Now, would it be plausible that if they're painting camo patterns on the rest of the vehicle that they might put some here? Yeah, completely plausible. And if you're doing this and you want to do that, go for it. But I thought for my where I want to head with this, I thought I want to make sure that the weathering that's on the legs is very visible and not muddied against another color. So I left those unpainted, except for the R-Limo 2. And you'll note that I did, on one foot here, I did a kind of a pattern there and a pattern here. And then on this one, I just painted the toe, I guess you'd say, and didn't try and do a pattern and didn't do anything over here. And again, in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, this is two guys working together, and somebody said, you know, put some color on the feet, and so this is how one guy interpreted it, and this is how the other guy interpreted it. And I know from experience, in my own Army experience, that sometimes that would happen, that, you know, you'd tell two people the same instructions, and they would go do something, and they would get very different results. But all you're looking for is some breakup of the outline and some variation in color. And so that's the little story that went on in my mind, and I'm sticking to it. All right, the next step will be to get this guy gloss coated, and I'll get started on the decals. All right, I have the model gloss coated. I just use Future floor polish. It's what I normally use for a utility gloss coat. You can use whatever gloss coat you prefer. The main point is get the surface glossy so that the decals will go on really nice. Now the kit decals, they're a little uninspiring to me, and they're kind of old. I'm not sure how well they'll work, but the great thing about building Maschinen Krieger is you're never short of decals. If you've built a few kits, you've got spares. So this is from the Falke, and this is from the Ammonite, and this is from the Nize, and an SAFS, and this is from the Mark III Raptor. So I'm just going to use a hodgepodge of decals from all of these sets, warning labels, numbers, markings, all of that, and just make some choices about you know, whether I want something to be a super saturated color like this or maybe a little more subdued like that. I'm not real sure yet, but I'll just work from all of these decals because they're all good. All right, I decided the basic decal scheme with this would be vehicle number 9, and I chose red simply because that's the opposite side of the color wheel from green. Makes sense to me. And then I'm going to use this heart and this spade to do kind of a nose art thing down here, and I'll overlap them. That's one of the great things about Maschinen Krieger is they use a lot of World War II type decals, and so I want to do kind of a nose art thing just right over here on this left side like you would often see it on aircraft in World War II. And then of course I'll go back and put in more stencils and things like that, warning stencils, but these will be the main markings. I'm going to put the A right up here on the lid, and the 9s will go either side on here. Now this is probably something that everybody is fairly comfortable with, but I'll go ahead and do it anyway just to get it on camera in case somebody is watching this and is not familiar with the process. I start off by cutting out my decal like that and holding it in my tweezers, and then going off camera I just dip it into a cup of warm water. I've actually got a coffee cup full of water over here, and I put it on a coffee cup warmer, and that keeps it at the exact temperature that I like to use for my decals. It's coffee warm, so if it's too hot to drink, then you probably don't want to use it. And then off camera, I just touched it to a piece of paper towel, and I'll just slide that in place. At least that's the plan. And then I'll just grab, now this is living dangerously, but it's just what I've always done. I'll grab my hobby knife and I'll position this like I want. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and look at it and see how this guy will be standing so that I can get it fairly even. It doesn't have to be because I'm imagining that these are field applied, but that works pretty good right there. And then I'll just take my cotton bud. Let me use this, and it's a little less spread out. I've actually been doing some decals for another model. I'm filming about 3 different videos at the same time this morning, so I've already been working on another model with its decals. Figured I'd just get it all done in one morning. But I just roll the water out because you don't want any air bubbles showing up under the decal there. And once I let that dry for about 5 minutes, I'm going to add some of this Walters, whatever you say, Solvaset to it. And again, if you use another decal solution, if you prefer another one, that's fine. The main thing is you want something that will just kind of melt the decal a little bit, pull it down to the model real tight, and give you a good finish over that. So now I'll just go ahead and put all the rest of the decals on the model. All right, I applied loads of decals to the model. You may be thinking that's quite a few stencils. Keep in mind, these are going to get toned down through weathering. I'm going to chip them. There's going to be things that diminish these, so I wanted to put a few more on there so that when all the steps were done, they would hopefully show up. That's the theory. That's the plan. I'm sticking with it. But I just put them, where I thought there was some logic, pointed some red arrows at some doors and put some stencils on doors and put some things above mechanical parts. And I painted in the middle of it all. I decided to paint this panel red in honor of my friend Lincoln Wright, who his channel on YouTube is Paint on Plastic. And if you want to get into machining Krieger, you have to watch his channel. He was a studio artist for Ko Yokoyama, who was the inventor of machining Krieger, and he's now the international brand ambassador for them, for Ko Yokoyama. So he knows his machining Krieger stuff, and which is an understatement. And on several of his models, he talks about doing a red panel just to make it jump out, and so I painted that one red, thinking with a smile on my face of my friend Link. So that's why that's there. But you see, I combined a couple of decals there for the nose art, I guess you'd call it, and cut back in the panel line so that I can put a wash in there. Now, after I put on the decals, I put on some Solvaset so that they would conform to the model nicely. Let that dry. Once that was dry, I put just brush painted some Future over each of the decals to seal them in, so that when I start the process of adding a wash, it won't get down under the decals, because there's very little you can do other than brush paint over the decal after that to fix it. So that step is very important before you do the washes. Now, at the beginning of the video, I said I hope to get through priming, painting, decals, and panel lining. Well, it hasn't taken me that long in terms of video to get to the point where I'm ready to panel line, and I realized before I do that, there's some things I need to paint. There's some details back here and some little details on the legs that I'm going to need to paint prior to putting on the washes. So I thought I would just jump into that and show you what I'm going to do there. Now, the first major thing I want to paint is just some mechanical components. And for that, I'm going to use Citadel's lead belcher. This deck back here, where all of these parts and pieces are, will need painting, and I'll need to be fairly careful around there to keep a neat edge. I can go back and correct it, but it's better to not mess up the first time. There's also some mechanical details here on the leg. I want to do something with these piston parts, at least some of them. There's a spring-like thing right here in the middle that will need some color. So there's just a few places, another one here. There's just a few places that I want to start off basing it with the lead belcher. Now, I don't know if I've mentioned in this video, I can't remember, because I filmed this over a couple of weeks. I can't remember if I've already mentioned this. I'm loving these Army Painter brushes, especially this Wargamer Regiment brush. This seems to be it keeps its tip. It's a natural bristle brush. Say that 10 times fast, especially at 5 o'clock in the morning. It holds its point very well. It's got a big enough belly that it holds paint. And I've been getting these on Amazon for like $6. So I've got a Winsor & Newton Series 7, and it's a super nice brush, but giving me a Winsor & Newton Series 7 is like putting a wristwatch on a pig. It's just not quite necessary. I use that Winsor & Newton, and I use this, and I'm no brush painter, so, you know, don't follow me as a brush painter, certainly. But this works just as well for me. So, and it's a little cheaper. Now, the difference in using, for me, that I've seen in using a natural bristle brush rather than a nylon brush, because I do use the cheaper nylon brushes a lot. In fact, I use them most of the time. The thing I've seen with these is these will hold their shape much, much longer. And so when I'm trying to do, like when I'm trying to get up along this edge here, it will hold its point. I can draw it to a point here in the palette, and I can come along here and run that paint right along there and get a fairly neat edge, neat enough that when I later put in a wash, if there's any wonkiness to it, the wash itself will kind of blend that in. So it holds paint well, it keeps its tip. I can't remember who, but I heard a painter, a mini painter one time, talk about he liked the snapback of a brush. And at the time, he didn't really explain it in detail. And I was like, well, what does he mean by snapback? Well, I think I'm beginning to understand what he meant as I use these natural bristle brushes. And I think I see what he means, and I do like the way these do that. Now, having said all of that, you know, I threw some shade. It sounded like I threw some shade at the Series 7. Look, if you have those are super brushes. My only complaint with them, not how they work, is their cost. I could get 2 of these for one of those. And I don't know why, but I'm particularly hard on brushes. I go through brushes fairly quickly. So, and I use all, you know, the master's cleaning stuff, and I do all of that, and I try to be gentle with them. But I go through brushes fairly quickly. So if you've not looked at these, they are a good, reasonably priced alternative to some of the higher end brushes that you see a lot of mini painters using. I noticed that now that Duncan Rhodes is on his own at the Duncan Rhodes Painting Academy. Great site, by the way. Great videos. That he uses these with some frequency. So, you know, if it's good enough for Duncan, heck, it's good enough for me. Anyway, I'll go on and continue painting this. I'm rambling on about paintbrushes now. I'll go on and continue painting in these details and then show you a few other spots of color that I add before getting to the panel lining. Okay, I got that back deck detail painted in and just a few other points around the model that I did the lead belcher, a couple of places on the legs. I did this spring detail, this leaf spring detail here, some more on the other side. I decided not to paint this silver because as I looked at it and the way the structure is here, it's not clear to me what would be the silver part of the piston and what wouldn't. So I'm going to hold off on that and kind of decide how I want to do that, what my thinking is on that. So I may do that off camera later. Next thing I want to do is I want to paint in start the base painting on the exhausts right here and on these couple of pipes, especially this larger one here, because that looks like something to me that, you know, might have some kind of heat going through it, or at least would be an interesting feature to treat it that way. Now, I've had my own method for painting exhausts for years, and I liked it, and I thought it worked really well. But recently, as I've been paying attention to, and I've been watching his stuff from the very first time he put up videos, Martin Kovac, that does the Night Shift channel on YouTube, he recently put up a video. He's done several videos on painting exhausts, and they're all very good, the great methods. He's got some quick ways of doing it, some more extended ways of doing it. But he recently did a video of the exhaust he did on a Tiger tank he was building. And I thought they looked stunning. And so I messaged him and I said, I am totally ripping off the method you used. He started by basing it in gray. So I'm using neutral gray here, which is a close. He used some gray primer as the first coat, if I remember correctly, but it was about a neutral gray. Now in this video, I'm only going to get this gray painting in, and I'll go into more detail about finishing the exhausts in the weathering video that will come next, the 1 or 2 videos that will come next in this series. But if you want to see how Martin did it and see it done correctly and well, you definitely want to go check out his video on weathering the exhausts for his Tiger tank. It's a fabulous method, but the beauty of it is the way he breaks it down and the way he demonstrates it. You come away from it. This is a sign of a good modeling teacher. You come away from it going, I think I can do that. And there aren't a lot of questions left in your mind. There's no steps left out. Sometimes some very good modelers will show some great models and some great techniques, but often, I don't know if, I'm guessing they just don't take into account how much they actually know, because they'll show something, and when you start to do it, I mean, obviously you're not going to be able to do it like they did, because right off the bat, because, you know, they've got a lot of experience, but you'll try it, and then you'll later come back and you'll start figuring out how to do it, and you'll realize that there were some intermediate steps or some additional pieces of information that would have been helpful to know before you got started. And I don't think anybody's disingenuous about, you know, holding back, not showing what they're doing, especially if it's on camera. Sorry about that. But Martin, just to get back to Martin just does an especially good job of showing you, here's what I do. And you really do come away with a sense of, I think I can do that. So anyway, I've got those base painted, and be ready for weathering and making them look rusty in the next video. I think it's time now to start with the panel lining. For the panel lining I want to do in this video, I'm going to use this Ammo MIG panel line wash. I'm using the PLW Deep Brown panel line wash. Now, I picked this because I like the color. I think the color will work well with these colors. You can use oils, you can use enamels, heck, you can use anything for your panel line washes. So there's no real, in terms of why I picked this one, I do like it. I like it, it flows very well. The color holds up. I like this. I've used this. I can't tell you how many airplanes I've used this on. So I really like it. But if you've got something else, don't think, well, I've got to go get that one. It's it's just a wash. But I've got some of the wash here, far more than I need actually. In my palette here, had a little bit of a minor accident pouring it. Anyway, I've got my wash here in the palette, and then I've got some odorless thinner here just to use to, sometimes I'll pre-wet panel lines if things aren't flowing. If I see that this isn't flowing well, I may thin it down a little bit. Use it to clean the brush off a little bit. I just always like having some handy. But when I'm using this, it generally right out of the bottle flows fairly well. Now, what I'm going to be doing here is more of a, I guess you'd say, a pen wash. And this must be getting a little old because it's not flowing real well, is it? When some of these thinners, or rather the panel line washes, get a little old, they often don't flow real well. They thicken up. I've got a bottle of MIG Productions from AK Interactive panel line wash, the dark panel line wash, and that stuff, you have to thin it down because it's quite stodgy, quite thick. But when I'm putting this in, I'm planning on doing this more of a pen wash. And I guess for a true pen wash, I'd have to have it much thinner than this. But I want to go in and clean up most of this. I just want the panel lines to stand out. I want the raised details to stand out. I'm not yet looking to stain things, to introduce a lot of weathering. You know, sometimes you can put in your panel lining and go back and clean things up and leave a lot of staining around. But I want to start off with a base that's fairly still fairly clean, and clean it up well, and then later when I want to go back and in the weathering video, there I'll be able to make choices about where I want the staining to go and that kind of thing. So I'm just using a nylon. Now this is, you know, I talked about the Army Painter brushes before. For this kind of work, I use cheap nylon brushes. I got these in quantity off of Amazon. They were $1 a piece, and I've got a jar of about 55 of them still sitting over here to my left. But they're fabulous for work where you're not real concerned about, you know, does the brush survive this? You just want to get some stuff on there, and these brushes work. They hold their point well. They have a decent enough belly in them. They don't last real long. I probably go through one brush every 30 days, but at $1 a pop, that's okay. So I think if you're, you know, if you're thinking of expanding the number of brushes you have, you want to have some nice brushes, but you want to have plenty of cheap brushes, because it's great to be able to put something on there, and if you look at the brush and go, man, that really kind of messed the brush up a little bit, then just toss it in the trash can and not feel, you know, you wouldn't want to do that with your Winsor & Newton. Pay $15 for a brush, you definitely don't want to throw that thing away. But with these, if I decide that, you know, it's a little too messed up from something I've done, well, I just toss it away and I don't worry about it. I'm rambling again. Sorry about that. Anyway, I'm going to continue around, and I'm just going to do these panel lines and just add in this color. Once it's added in, I'll probably give it half an hour to dry, and then I'll go back and I'll initially use a cotton bud to clean it off, to clean off the excess, and then I'll use a brush damped with thinners to clean off anything that didn't get. All right, I have the basic panel lining done, and everything is mostly cleaned up. I did the work yesterday and then set it aside, and I'm up early in the morning the next day, and I've looked at a few places that I realized I missed in the cleanup. So I always have to go back 2 or 3 times, because especially with one that has so many little greeblies like this. It can take a while to clean up everything. You may miss something, or at least I do. But I like the way it looks. It did what I wanted. It defines the panel lines in a fairly neat, clean way. And then as I start the weathering in the next video, it will give me the basis that I can then build on, so that if I want, some particular grime in this area, I can put it, but, I may not want it over here. It just depends on how heavily I end up weathering the model, which, now that I say that, I think we all know I'm going to weather the heck out of it, because I have absolutely no restraint when it comes to weathering. Anyway, another just thought on the process, and I've used enamels and oils for panel lining and weathering and stuff for years on hundreds of models, and more I'm finding that I prefer oils. The panel line wash that I used yesterday, the Ammo MIG panel line wash, like I said in that segment, I've used it for years. I have had to have used it on several hundred models. And in that time, I've also used oils. But looking back, if I'm going to have anything that causes me to, anything happens that causes me to grit my teeth, more and more I'm realizing it's probably going to be enamels. And I don't know if it's got to do with the way they're produced, the thinners, or what, but I may be switching more to oils and using far less enamels going forward, even though sometimes they can be a little more, there's a little more involved than just shaking the bottle and starting to use them. But I just find oils, I don't know, they're a little more friendly. Anyway, it may just be me. I'm going to call this a video. Obviously, if all I'm doing is rambling about my own personal preferences about enamels and oils, it's probably time to end this thing. So he is where he is. I like the way it looks. I like the way these colors turned out. I mean, they're fairly basic, but I think it fits with the Maschinen Krieger universe. I like the markings, the way they turned out. They make sense to me, and I feel like they sell part of the story, which is what I want to happen. Now, the next video or two will pretty much cover weathering the model, and whether that's one or two videos, I don't know. It will be determined by how much weathering I decide to put into it, and how much time I need, and sometimes drying time can determine the length of a video. If you get certain stuff done and you just need to wait a week to let a bunch of oils dry, sometimes that's a good indication that you stop the video now. But this video, and I've already said this, but this one's done, so I need to stop talking. Anyway, thank you so much for watching this video, especially if you're here at this point. Just for fun, if you're here at this point, just drop into the comments below, "I am an Iron Man." Those words, "I am an Iron Man," just those, nothing else. Just so I'll know, if somebody watching here, I just think that'll be funny. So I appreciate you being a patron. It really is just such a blessing for me and my family, and keeps me going in the hobby. So thank you so much. I hope everyone's doing well at this time, and I hope you've enjoyed this video. So as I always say, if you're not having fun in this hobby, you're doing it wrong. Happy day to you, friends. Bye-bye. Oops.